was accepted to college, but now it's
Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for taking the time.
My great pleasure, Alex.
All right, so the first question is the obvious question. Why are you doing this? Why do you want to be governor?
Well, I could say there's insanity in my family, but truthfully, I have spent my career working to improve the education. Really is my wheelhouse. And, you know, I'm the first in my family to go to college. It'll change my life forever. And so when I ran for city council, I convened the first dual meeting between the city and the school district. We all got together and talked about how we could help these kids. And then when I got to go to the legislature, I begged to be on the education committee. And first, Willie Brown wasn't going to put me on education. And it took me a couple of years to convince him. But, you know, because I didn't have kids of my own, so he didn't think, why would I care, you know? Well, education is really the be-all and end-all. It's the reason there's a Silicon Valley in California. There's no rivers, there are no Tigris or Euphrates confluence. It was a confluence of educational opportunities that made this state the richest state in the planet, and it really is something that we've dropped the ball on. So when I graduated from high school, we were 5th of the 50 states in per pupil spending, tied with New York. This afternoon, New York spends more than twice what California spends per child, and we have dropped to 41st in per pupil spending. And I watched as that was happening, and not investing in higher ed, and not investing in child development and in preschool, and it all came together, and I decided I would jump back in.
So what do we do different on education?
Well, we have to invest more money in education, and we have, you know, we're the most expensive state in the union, and we have the highest number and percentage of poor kids and the highest number and percentage of English learners. We should be in the top 10 in per pupil spending, which we were when I was a kid, not in the bottom 10. And so we have to make this a priority again, the way families do. Budgets are statements of values. You can tell the values of a family or a city or a county or a state by where it invests its money.
How do you deal with the teachers union?
Well, I think, you know, most of the people that I know that are teachers are in it because they're on a mission. They're not in it to make the most money. They could make more money in many other professions. They're in it because they really want to help kids have a wonderful future. And, you know, the teachers unions can be a little thuggish at times, especially in some communities. But the bottom line is, usually they're on the side of the children. And when they're on the side of the children, I'm on their side. When they're not on the side of the children, then I think we all have to part company. And so, for example, CTA had a bill that they were sponsoring, say that teachers didn't have to do lesson plans. That's not in the best interest of our children. So I opposed that bill. And they were upset about it, but they got over it. And the bill got defeated because it was the wrong thing to do.
So if we spend more money on education, what do we spend less on?
Well, I think we have to take a good look at Prop 13 and say it's really time to begin reassessing commercial and industrial property on a more regular basis. That's what we've been doing for housing. Ironically, we passed 13 to give homeowners a better shot at not having to have these dramatic increases in property taxes. But now the homeowners pay a much bigger percentage of the total share of property tax because their properties turn over every 30 or 40 years, whereas the Disneyland is being taxed as if it was 1978. So making a change where we regularly update the assessments on commercial industrial, that money, if you went to the voters and said, and we're going to put that money into education, they'd say, great, we're for that.
Another big expenditure potentially would be single-payer health care. Some estimates, $400 billion. Do you think that's worth it? Do you think do you support it?
Well, I do. I really do think there's a point where California has to look at citizens in the eye and say health care is a right, not a privilege for the wealthy. And what we see now, I saw a doctor testified before the legislature some years ago. He said he'd had a terrible weekend, that his parents had brought in their son, he was 7, he was unconscious, his fever was over 107 degrees, he was very near death. And all because he didn't get $4 worth of antibiotics. He had a raging ear infection. So the doctors all pooled their efforts together and they worked all night and they saved the little boy's life. But he's deaf in one ear, he's disabled now. It costs the taxpayers over $50,000, all because we didn't give him $4 worth of antibiotics. So in some ways it's pay me now or pay me later. When you look at Canada, they have a slightly less population in California. They spend less on health care and they have much better health care for all their people.
But could this bankrupt California, and could you be in a situation, if California is the only state that does this, that all the sick people from the rest of the country are just going to come here and get treatment?
Well, I think there are, other states that are trying to move in the right direction. Massachusetts under a Republican governor created a system that gives some health care coverage for everyone. So I think if we get nimble and creative and we are able to use some of the money that's already in the system. Now this has something to do with a guy named Donald Trump. So, if he's cooperative, we might be able to pull something off a little less expensive than if he's not.
Speaking of him being cooperative, there's also the issue of immigration. Should California be a sanctuary state, and what do we do about immigration in the era of President Trump?
Well, in one of my last lives, I was a political science professor. With great interest, I watched the states' rights people for many, many decades wave the 10th Amendment to the Constitution under the nose of Democrats. And that's the one that says all powers not given to the federal government nor denied to the states shall be the power of the states and to the people. And so I think the people have a right to protect our neighbors and friends. I don't know any 100% Native Americans. I'm sure there are a few in California, but most of the people I know are the children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren of immigrants. We are a state of immigrants. We've always been a state of immigrants. And so I think it's just prudent for us to try to protect our neighbors and friends and stand up for what's right in California. Pete Wilson went after the immigrants with Prop 187 and then with 209 and 227. But I stood up to him in all three of those initiatives. And he then, right after I was elected, one of only 3 out of 8 Democrats that year because of 187, he challenged me to direct the teachers of California to do background checks on their students. And I told him I'd see him in court, and we won that lawsuit. And so there are things people try to do that look sexy and have appeal in the short run, but in the long run, they change California from a red state to a blue state because many people decided that we needed to do the right thing. Since then, the voters have turned down the end of bilingual education by a huge margin because, well, everybody who's got a brain knows that in Europe, they're all learning 2, 3, 4, 5 languages, and we're somehow unable to teach 2.
Yeah, that's been a disaster politically for Republicans in this state ever since as well.
Exactly.
But what about housing? Because that's kind of been a disaster for everybody in this state. What do we do?
Well, we have a really serious crisis here. And I think what we have to do is, short term, we've got to do something to get these women and children off the streets. It breaks my heart to see children on the streets that are 1, 2, 3, 4 years old. So we've got to have a full court press on some vouchers, some short-term solutions. Then we've got to have a much longer-term set of issues that we deal with. We got to not necessarily get rid of California environmental quality, but we got to streamline it so it doesn't take 5 years to get a housing development approved. It has to be made shorter, and it has to be made much more direct. I'm convinced that there's a lot of things in California that can be modernized. When I got to the Department of Education, nobody to talk to the people who worked there about how could we speed things up? How could we facilitate your work? What could we do to work smarter? They were just kind of trudging along. We had people on IBM computers that couldn't email people on Apple computers. Somehow somebody thought that was okay. So we got people together and we started working as a team. What could we do to help the education of children? The department morale shot up. The effectiveness of the work done at the department went up. I think we have a lot of good people working at EDD and DMV and Caltrans that would really like to be part of a more responsive agencies and just haven't been asked what they could do. Speaking
of working together, what do you see as your potential relationship with the President Trump if you were governor of this state?
Well, it's hard to say. I find him to be an offensive personality. The idea that you don't applaud him makes you treasonous, I don't know. I don't think he's well schooled in terms of the values of our country, well, let alone of our Constitution and our values as a nation. And I want to see California continue down a path of great respect and cooperation. And when I was in the legislature, we got a lot done because people could reach across the aisle. And in particular, the Women's Caucus at that time was very cooperative because, as one of my Republican friends said, the only place you're treated worse than in the Democratic caucus if you're a woman is the Republican caucus. But we found we could get together and get some things done. And I think we can do that, men and women, if we have leadership that does, in fact, say, how can we do the most effective work for the state of California and its citizens?
Talking about values and where you get your values from, talk to us a little bit about your childhood.
Well, I had a very interesting childhood. It started out, my dad was in the Navy. He was a career Navy man, and so I was born in San Diego. We lived there twice in my first 5 years of life, and my mother was from San Francisco. My dad was from Kentucky, so they were the odd couple, Hank and Dottie. But nobody loved California more than my dad. He used to say, Californians are people born somewhere else who came to their senses. And when he got out of the Navy, they bought a little house that cost more than one they could have bought, but they wanted the best schools they could afford. And so I got a chance to leave a classroom in San Francisco where I was one of 44 kids to enter a classroom in San Carlos where I was the 20th child.
And so you saw there about the importance of class size reduction, right?
Huge difference. And the teacher in San Francisco was a good teacher. She had 44 kids. The teacher in San Carlos was a good teacher. She only had 20 kids. So she was able to move much farther along with just 20. And that's why I fought for class size reduction in kindergarten through third grade when I was superintendent of schools. And ironically, Pete Wilson made fun of me for the first 7 months that I proposed it. And then we were winning a lawsuit against him, and he was going to have to put $2.3 billion on the table. And I said, it'd be better to do something important with that than just put it on the table and have it go wherever it goes. And so he agreed that we'd do class size reduction, but instead of the 4-year timetable that I had, he told me to do it in 6 weeks. And so guess what? We did it. I went to meet with the governor, and he had one of his staff there, and he said, I'm sorry we didn't give you more time, Delaine, a $2.3 billion project. I didn't give you any staff or any time to do this, but anything I can do to help? I said, yes, Governor, you can get your 5 state agencies out of my way. So I beg your pardon? I said, I can't deal with the Office of Public School Construction, the Office of the State Architect, the State Allocation Board. And he turns to his staff and he says, do we really have all those agencies? And his staff person said, don't go there, Governor. Delaine tried to eliminate 4 of them, and we wouldn't let her. So he agreed that they would not have a role in this, that just my department would do the application, and we would do, and then we had to get the portable housing people to put on double shifts, and they did it. And so we got 30,000 new classrooms delivered in time for, some of them started in September and some in February, but it was a big move. And we wound up having some teachers with emergency credentials because we needed 30,000 new teachers as well.
Yeah.
But overall, it was a huge success, and people still come to me and say, wow, that was the best.
And let's talk a little bit about your educational background. You went to UC Santa Barbara, UC San Diego?
UC Davis as an undergraduate.
Okay.
And then UC Santa Barbara graduate school. So I got this great public school education, and I got to go to the finest public university in the world, and I got my bachelor's degree. It was still a stretch for a machinist and a desk clerk to send their kid away to school, but at $82.50, it wasn't as hard as it is today.
And you went to eventually went to the state legislature.
Yes.
As one of the few women there.
Yeah, I was actually teaching part-time at community colleges, and finally I was up for a full-time job, and I had been wanting to run for city council, and Prop 13 passed, and they froze all new hires. So I actually left teaching and went to the private sector, where I made 4 times as much money in the first year as I made teaching at 2 campuses. But I was able to run for city council over in Union City, and then eventually I ran for the legislature. I was the first woman to represent that area of the state. And, again, there'd only been 31 women in history before me who'd gone to the legislature.
What would it mean to you to be the first female governor of California?
Oh, it would be marvelous. I mean, I was the first woman to be superintendent of schools, ironically. So I would get, to say I did 2 of those things the first time. But it would mean the world to me because I was a political science instructor before I went into the government. And then later, when I came out of the superintendency, I worked at Mills College for 4 years, and I taught a women in politics class. So I know a lot about it. And the bigger the state, the harder it is to elect a woman. So if you think about it, Ann Richards was 1 4-year term governor in Texas. We had a woman governor in New Jersey, but never in New York, Illinois, Florida, or California. The bigger the states, the harder it is. And so I think it would be just absolutely wonderful. And when I was head of the Department of Education, over half of my leadership was female. And that would happen for the first time in the state's history. We'd have a lot of really great women who would be leading the And they'd come from a variety of different backgrounds, but they would be women and men that would work together on behalf of the future of California.
And what would the message that would be sent to little girls at Delaine Eastin Elementary School or other schools around the country to have a female governor?
That anything is possible, irrespective of whether you're a man or a woman, left-handed or right-handed, tall or short, whether you're a person with disabilities or not. I mean, what we want to say is the real problem of our society can be solved if everybody decides to work together, and that there's nothing that we can't do. And so one of my favorite quotes is from Neil Postman, who said, "Children are living messages we send to a time we will never see." I want our message to the future to be brilliant, and to be, anything is possible in California and America.
And in terms of your legacy, I just mentioned this, but there's a Delaine Eastin Elementary School out there. What is that like when you see that?
It's the best. You go there and the kids are they go crazy that you're alive, for one thing. That's one thing about New Haven Unified and Union City. They name schools after people before they die, which is kind of nice because then you get to see the school. But the kids are amazing. It's a very diverse student population. They're full of joy and energy, and they just give you a lot of warmth and energy. And so I love going there. It's like getting a shot in the arm. It's really something. It's amazing.
And I know you weren't able to have kids physically yourself, but do you feel like you've had a whole lot of kids over the years?
My husband at the time said, "Well, we didn't wind up having any of our own, but you had 6.1 million, so that counts for something." And I feel very blessed to have been part of a lot of young people's lives, though, and I'm mentored to several, especially women, but a few good men, and I look at them and I want more for their kids than we're giving them. I mean, I have a young friend, 2 years at Riverside Community College, 2 years at Berkeley, got her bachelor's, 3 years at UCLA Law. She's got a new baby, she and her husband living in a one-bedroom apartment. They don't know how they're going to afford the child care because it's going to be as much as their rent. And she already has $248,000 worth of debt from going to public college and public universities. It's amazing.
A last couple questions that I've asked everybody. One, do you have anything nice to say about the other candidates or any of the other candidates?
Well, I'm glad that there's interest in wanting to do this important work, and the Greeks invented the word democracy from two Greek words, demos and kratos, government by the people. They also invented the word idiot, and it meant one who does not participate in politics. So I'm glad that we have good, hearty participation, and it's the most diverse field that's ever run. I think that's a good thing, but I do think it is time for us to elect a woman as governor of California.
And last question, what do you think is the biggest misconception about you?
I don't know, maybe that there are people that I think don't necessarily think I have a great sense of humor. And I do have a good time in my life. I enjoy my life. And I think, yes, I work hard. Yes, I read a lot. Yes, I study a lot. But I also believe that it's important to have joy in your heart and to think about the future in a positive way. And so I think there are some people that think I'm a little wonky, but I'm a happy soul.
Well, you've shared some funny lines with us today. Anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
Well, only that, my family's been in California 5 generations. Before, I'm the 5th, and now there's a great-grand-nephew. So we're up to 8 generations of Californians, but that's one side of the family. The other side of the family is somebody who immigrated here. It's very typical California history, and I hope it continues to be positive and optimistic.
Delaine Eastin, it's been a pleasure getting to know you, and thank you for sharing your views.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Yeah.